Então, agora, diretamente da Índia, fazendo uma pequena escala em Londres, o professor Sugata Mitra vai contar para a gente um pouquinho dessa história de educação com tecnologia do outro lado do mundo. Professor Sugata? Professor?
Well, good morning. It's lovely to be back in Rio. And, before I start my talk, I thought I'll tell you how I came here. I started yesterday in the afternoon from Newcastle upon Tyne in northeastern England. Then I came to Paris. Then I slept all night on the plane, got off the plane here, and right outside the plane, there was someone waiting to get me. I didn't have to go through, immigration, and I just walked out. And there were two beautiful ladies waiting with a helicopter. So I flew all over. I flew over Copacabana, and here I am, landed on the top of the building. Well, this talk is called The Future of Learning, and that's not a very, very easy talk to give, because the future today changes so quickly that even trying to predict, 5 years up ahead is not really very easy. But let me try. If I could have the presentation. Yep. Well, if you have to look at the future of learning, a good place to start might be to look at where it came from. Where did schooling come from? It's really hard to find out, because if you read in history, no matter how far back you go, you find that schools always existed. So we don't know who invented schools. But we do know in the recent past that schooling was really a product of the big empires on this planet. Just to take an example, if you take a big empire like that and you have to run the whole world, in an age when there are no computers, there's not even telephones. How do you do it? Well, most of the empires, particularly the British and the Spanish and the Portuguese empires, invented a method. And that method was like a worldwide network of computers, except that the computers were all people. They were called the administrative machinery. Data would flow by ships, and it would come from country to country and get processed by a large number of administrative people. Where would those people come from? So the Age of Empires invented a system. They would come out of schools with only one purpose: to be able to run an empire. What kind of people do you need? Well, you're familiar with this picture, which has been around for a long, long time. What it produces are identical people. You know, you have to realize that it was designed to produce identical people. They would come out of school all identical. You could take one from a colony in South America and transport them into a colony in Canada or in New Zealand, and they would function exactly the same way. You also needed to maintain law and order in the empires, and that too required identical people. When the Age of Empires ended, the Industrial Revolution began, and the action moved to the United States. The captains of the industry there said, "This is wonderful. We need identical people to buy identical things, and those identical things would be made by other identical people." So the system continued. But then the Age of Empires is over. The manufacturing industry is moving away. So who are we producing these children for? Let's look for a moment at this question. Who wants your child when he or she comes out of school? Why do you put a child into school in the first place? Thank you. Why do you put your child into school in the first place? Parents. Parents have a certain expectation of what their child should look like and behave like when they come out of school. Let's look at that as a picture. Let's say it looks like this. This is what the parent wants. But there is somebody else who also wants your child, and that is the government. Does the government want exactly what the parent wants? Well, not quite. The government wants the perfect citizen, and that's not exactly what the parent wants. It's mostly what the parents want, but not exactly. There is a third person waiting for your child. But before I talk about that person, let's agree on one thing. That because parents have to send their children to school, and because governments pay the schools to run, schools have to be designed to please them. The third person waiting for your child is the employer. The employer also wants your child to be a certain way. But we don't design schools to please the employer because employers don't pay the school. So the employer then says, well, he's a fine boy, but I have to retrain him. I have to teach him lots of things that he doesn't know. And then there is yet another body of people who want your child. A loose body whom we completely ignore. the peers, his friends, his social milieu. Because we ignore them, they don't like school. And nobody likes to be ignored. But now, imagine an 8-year-old. Now here we are, 2,500 teachers over here. What are we going to do with that 8-year-old? Well, first of all, we must remember that that 8-year-old is going to live, most probably, for 120 years. So you're going to prepare that 8-year-old for 100 years from now. So he does his 10 years of schooling, he comes out of school, the parents are happy, the government is happy, the employer says it's okay, the peers say we don't know what all this is for. 40 years pass, the parents are gone, the government has changed 8 times or 10 times, we don't know what they want anymore. The employers, there are employers whom we cannot even imagine, jobs that we cannot even imagine. So 3 of those 4 groups are gone. What is the child left with? Only his peers, with whom he will spend the rest of his life, and for whom we did not design education. So we do have a problem. What do we do about it? So when you say that the younger generation today is disengaged with education, there is a reason for it, a very good reason. So here we are in the 21st century, and we're going to prepare these children for 100 years. What shall we do? Well, I'll give you a recent case. About a month and a half ago, in Harvard University, there was a newspaper headline which said 150 undergraduates caught cheating. So I looked at that and I thought, there's something wrong with this. Because 150 undergraduates of the quality that can go into Harvard, why would they be cheating? There must be something wrong with the word cheating. So I put this up on my Facebook page and I said, what exactly happened? And the next day, the Students' Union brought out a statement where they said, we didn't know that we were cheating. Our assignment said that collaboration is encouraged. Our assignment also said using of internet resources is encouraged. So we texted each other. We elected one of us to write the assignment. She wrote the assignment and she uploaded it to her homepage. When you upload something on the internet, it becomes an internet resource. The rest of us downloaded it. Was it cheating or was it not? Or is there a problem which is different from anything we've seen before? So I'm going to make this statement that schooling as we know it, with its military and industrial background, is outdated. It's obsolete. You know, things go obsolete. And when something goes obsolete, we miss it, you know, because we feel nostalgic about it. To give you an example, the fountain pen. It used to be such a nice thing, you know, you had to open the top, pour ink, it had a nib. It's gone. We might miss it, but it's replaced by a cheap little plastic ballpoint pen, which works and which everybody can have. So, is something like that going to happen to schooling? There is yet another thing that's happening in the world today, which we often don't quite notice. I've got one example here. I don't know how many of people in this room recognize what's on the bottom of that screen. It's a gadget called the radiogram. The radiogram has a record player on one side, and it has a radio on the other side. And they were very expensive. They were like pieces of furniture kept inside a house. Then the Japanese invented the tape recorder. And the radiogram became that big. It was still quite heavy, but we all said, wow, we can now carry the radiogram from one room to another. A few more years passed, and Sony invented the Walkman. And now you could put the radiogram in your pocket and walk around with it. And then came the MP3 player. The radiogram was now so inexpensive and so small that you could actually lose it. It could just fall out of your pocket and you could lose it and say, I lost my radiogram. But what happened to the MP3 player is even more surprising. The MP3 player vanished. It disappeared into a cloud of zeros and ones and went up there into the internet. All you needed was any gadget with which you can connect to the internet, and all the music, all the video, and everything that you could possibly want in entertainment was available to you. It used to happen in fairy tales that you wave a wand and something disappears, vanishes. But it's happened in our lifetimes to the radiogram. It's vanished. What else is vanishing? Well, banks. They still have their great big buildings, but what do they tell their customers? Don't come here. Money itself is dematerializing. Stocks and shares have dematerialized. What else will dematerialize? What does it mean for learning? What do you think of that? I've never put that up in front of so many teachers before. Well, let's suppose that I take an office just outside here in Rio, and I put a signboard saying, Sugata Mitra, Chartered Accountant. In my office, under the table, I have a screen, a computer screen. And I have an invisible keyboard, which I can just type in air, and that will give the input to that device. My first customer comes in and says, I have a problem with my balance sheet. So I say, a problem with what? And he says, balance sheet. And I say, your balance sheet. Have you got a hard copy? Leave it behind and come back tomorrow. As soon as he leaves, I start Googling. I first find out what a balance sheet is. Then I find out what can go wrong with a balance sheet. Then I get on the internet and I look for chartered accountants and I ask them, I Skype them, I look at their Facebook pages. By the evening, I've solved the problem. You come back the next day and you get your improved balance sheet. And then you go out and say, you know, that new accountant, Sugata Mitra, he's a bit funny because whenever you ask him something, he twiddles his hands like this and looks down. But he's okay, he gets the job done. Now, am I pretending or am I not? Suppose the next day, another customer comes, and he also has a problem with a balance sheet. Do I need to look up balance sheet again the next day? I don't, because I just looked it up yesterday. So my pretending becomes just a little easier. Let's say I get away with it for a year. At the end of the year, people are saying, you know, that guy, Sugata Mitra, is not a bad accountant, he's okay. Then I pretend for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I'm getting invited to conferences to address chartered accountants about chartered accountancy. So was it pretense? Or could it be that we become what we pretend? I think that's a very important thing for educators to think about. So many of you are teachers, which means that there was a time when you came out of an educational institution with a piece of paper which said, you are a teacher from now on. But were you a teacher on that day? Or were you just pretending to be one? Could it be that 20 years later, you look back and you say, I was not a teacher then, I'm a teacher now? If that is the case, if we do become what we pretend, then what's wrong with Google? Why don't we let it into the classroom? Well, I bumped into this problem many years ago, 13 years ago, when I was working in New Delhi, and I used to teach people how to write computer programs. They were all rich people. And I used to think to myself that what about the children in these slums outside? How do I know that they won't be very good computer programmers also if I could give them the opportunity? But I couldn't get a teacher to go and teach in those slums. So I tried an experiment. I thought to myself, what would happen if I just give them a computer? And people, this was 13 years ago, and people said, what's the point? They don't know what a computer is. They don't know what the internet is. None of them know any English, and my computer was running in English. So what do you expect to achieve? I said, I don't know, but I would like to try. So I managed to get some money and built what you see on the screen, a do-it-yourself ATM kind of thing, sticking out of the slum wall. It was about 3 feet off the ground, and I turned it on and left it there. And naturally, a lot of children came immediately, and they said, what's this? I said, I don't know. So they said, can we touch it? I said, well, I don't know. So they said, why have you put it here? And I said, I don't know. And I left. About 8 hours later, some of my colleagues came and said, you know what's happening? Those children, they're browsing on the internet, and they're teaching each other how to browse. So I said, but that's impossible. How can it happen? And they said, well, there could be an easy answer. They must have been wondering what all this is when one of your students must have been passing by, and he showed them how to use the mouse. So I thought, well, yes, that's possible. So I moved the experiment and did it all over again. This time, I went to a village about 300 miles away from New Delhi, right inside rural India, into a kind of place where the chances of a passing computer programmer would be zero. So in that village, I put in this computer, I left it there, and I came back after 3 months. When I came back, I found that children were playing games on the computer. When they saw me, they said, the first thing they said was, we need a faster processor and a better mouse. So I was surprised. And I asked them, how do you know all this? So they said something very interesting. They said, you've given us a computer that works only in English, so we taught ourselves English in order to use it, as though it was very simple. But it's the first time that I heard this word from a learner. We taught ourselves. And I repeated this experiment. I got some funding from the World Bank at that time. I repeated the experiment over and over just to see if the results were accidental or they would happen everywhere. It took about 5 years to do that. And here's a look at the first few years. If you would click on that. This is the first day at the hole-in-the-wall computer. The boy on the right is 8 years old. To his left is a student who is 6. Into the deserts of Rajasthan. So at the end of 5 years of measurements, I got this. I will explain that to you in just a moment. What this graph says is that given unsupervised access to the internet, groups of children will achieve the same level of competency as an average office secretary in 9 months' time. So back in 2005, when I published this, people said, what does this mean for training? Because this is just happening by itself. I didn't quite know what the answer was, but I could tell them that, look, at least as far as learning to use a computer is concerned, you don't need training. Today, in 2012, we know that because everywhere you can see children with, iPhones and iPads. Nobody ever teaches them anything. In fact, they often teach the adults how to use these devices. So we know that children can learn to operate computers by themselves. But another question came up. So what? People asked me that you've put these computers in all these remote places and gone away. What has it done for them? I didn't have the money to go back and try to figure out what had happened. But a lucky coincidence happened. A filmmaker in India was driving up the western coast when she came across a village, and in a stretch of wall on that village, she saw two computers sticking out. And the computers were still working, and there were children around them. So she stopped, and she got off the car and walked up to the children. And the children said, "These computers are made for children, not for you." So she said, no, I'm not going to touch them. But who put them there? How did you get these computers? And the children said, many, many years ago, they were all little children, so they said, many, many years ago, a man from Delhi had come and put these computers into the wall, and he never came back. So the filmmaker stopped, and she decided to find out what had happened in that village. She made a documentary film out of it, which tells the story of a really remarkable school teacher, a village school teacher, and an even more remarkable child. I brought that film along, and what I've done is I've cut it down so that it takes only about 5 minutes, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you would click, please.
यहाँ पे गोवा की बॉर्डर शुरू होती है, वहाँ पे हमारा एक गांव है छोटा सा. एक बाजू में पूरा समंदर है, एक बाजू में पूरा सह्याद्री है, और इस दोनों के बीच हमारा गांव है. इस रिमोट प्लेस में कोई भी सुविधा नहीं थी. ऐसे इस टाइम 5 साल पहले हमारे स्कूल में NIT और ICICI इनके दोनों के माध्यम से हमारे स्कूल में कियोस्क सेंटर दिखाया गया 2002 में. तो कियोस्क सेंटर का मतलब ही यही था कि बच्चों कंप्यूटर कैसा सीखते हैं, बच्चों की सीखने की पद्धति कौन सी है. 8 से 10-20 तक हमारे स्कूल में के जो आने वाले बच्चे हैं, वो हर बच्चे सब बच्चे कियोस्क सेंटर पर जाते हैं. उसमें कंप्यूटर जो है और देखने वाले 20 रहते हैं. दो कंप्यूटर एक का एक सेटअप होता है. 2 दिन 3 दिन जाके देखते थे, अपने को कुछ करने आता है क्या इसका वो जायजा लेते थे, वापस फिरते थे. आहिस्ता आहिस्ता बच्चों की भीड़ कियोस्क सेंटर पे बढ़ने लगी और बच्चे तो गेम्स ओपन करने लगे. गेम खेलते खेलते को थक जाते तो नया नया एक एक प्रोग्राम ओपन करते थे, यानी कि पेंट ब्रश ओपन करते थे.
जब 7th में था तो हमारे स्कूल में कियोस्क लग गया. लग जाने के बाद मैं हर रोज़ वहाँ पे जाता था, और पहले तो कुछ पता नहीं था क्या करते, कंप्यूटर कभी देखा नहीं था, हार्डली कभी स्कूल में लेक्चर्स के टाइम कभी सर ने दिखाया था, उतना ही. लेकिन बाद में मैं हमेशा जाने लगा. और
जब कियोस्क आया तो कभी जाओ वो हमेशा खुला रहता था और कुछ भी कर सकते थे.
बात होने से बच्चों को तुरंत समझ में आने लगा कि गूगल ये सर्च.
और कियोस्क पे भी बहुत मज़ा आता था, जब मुझे चाहिए करके जब हम वहाँ पे झगड़ा करते थे, नहीं मैं भी बैठूंगी, क्योंकि वो सिर्फ 2 ही थे और हम बहुत सारे बच्चे, तो बहुत मज़ा आता था.
लोग घड़ा लेके 4 किलोमीटर जाते थे पानी के लिए. आज हमारे गांव में इतना पानी है, पानी की कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. गूगल अर्थ से मेरा गांव मैंने पूरा सिलेक्ट किया है. इसका यूज़ जा सकता है, मेरा तो ऊपर नहीं आ सकता. इसके लिए इस सैटेलाइट मैप का बहुत यूज़ हुआ कि परफेक्ट लोकेशन पे हम पानी रुकाएंगे तो उस पानी पूरा ज़मीन में जा सकता है और पानी के वाटर लेवल चेंज हो सकती है. तो हमने क्या किया, जहाँ पे कुआं निकलना था स्कूल के यहाँ प्रीमाइस में, इसका जो शूट किया हमने, तो उसका हाइट मिलता है
डिस्टेंस बिटवीन द अर्थ एंड कैमरा।
तालाब से निकले हुआ जो एक नाला है छोटा सा, उस नाले को स्कूल के नज़दीक है, यहाँ पे स्पॉट दिया है हमने, इसका हाइट निकाला, उसका हाइट और स्कूल के एरिया का जो हम जहाँ पे ये निकाले उसके हाइट का डिफरेंस निकाला। वो 14 फुट का तो निकला, 14 फुट का डिफरेंस है, ये 14 फुट ऊपर है, वो 14 फुट नीचे है। तो हमने कॉमन लॉजिक यूज़ किया कि 14 फुट हम कुआं निकालेंगे तो इस पर पानी लगेगा, क्योंकि उसके जो फ्लो रहते हैं वो डेप्थ में रहते हैं, और हमें 16 फुट पे पानी लगा है।
मैं कियोस्क पे जाके सर्च करता था गूगल पे, तब मुझे एक वेबसाइट मिली न्यू साइंटिस्ट, उसमें बहुत सारे आर्टिकल्स आते थे, और मुझे बचपन से ही जीन्स और डीएनए उसमें बहुत इंटरेस्ट था, क्यूरियोसिटी थी ये क्या है एग्जैक्टली, तो इसलिए और वो आर्टिकल्स उसमें से पढ़ के मुझे और इंटरेस्ट डेवलप हो गया, और मैंने 10th में डिसाइड किया कि आई गो फॉर बायोटेक्नोलॉजी।
So, you know, this is a disproportionately large effect from a very small input. Just two computers stuck inside a wall. How many such cases are there in India or in the rest of the world? I don't know, because I don't have the means to find out. But we found one. How does this happen? Because this is not teaching and learning in the sense in which we understand it in school. There must be some other mechanism at work here. So I started to experiment with different subjects and found out that children in groups, given the right small input, will often produce a very large output without any intervention. All this is published actually and available from the internet if you're interested. But by this time I was beginning to get very curious to know that if groups of children can achieve educational objectives on their own, then why can there not be a big change in the way in which schools are designed and operated? But in England at that time, the question was, how far can it go? Are you saying, they asked me, are you saying that they can do all the educational objectives on their own? Or is it that they can do some? How far will it go? I didn't have an answer, so I designed an experiment to find out. And the experiment was designed to fail. The experiment was that, Tamil is a language spoken in South India. The research question was, can Tamil-speaking children from a village in India teach themselves the biotechnology of DNA replication in English from a street-side computer on their own? And I thought, what a silly experiment. I'll give them a pre-test. They'll get a 0. I'll give them 2 months, and I'll give them a post-test. They'll get another 0. I'll go back to England and say, we need teachers. So I found a village. It was called Kuppam. The village Kuppam in South India had already 2 computers two hole-in-the-wall computers, which I had given them many years ago. So the children were quite familiar with computers. Into those computers, I downloaded material on genetics, basically biotechnology. So the children came running immediately and said, "What's this?" So I said, "Take a look at this." So they looked at it and they said, "But how can we understand anything? Because it's all in English, it's got big words, it's got diagrams. How can we understand?" So I said, "I have no idea. And anyway, I'm going to go away." I went with no expectations. And I came back after 2 months. I called the children, and they said, "We haven't understood anything." So I said, "Well, what did I expect?" So I asked them, "How many times did you look before you came to the conclusion that you cannot understand anything?" So the children said, "We look at it every day." So I said, "You don't understand a word of what you're looking at, and you've been looking at it every day. What for?" So then one of the little girls raised her hand, and she said in broken Tamil and English, she said, "Well, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else." So you can imagine I was very astonished, and I post-tested them. What came out was an educational impossibility. 0 to 30% in 2 months, in a language that they don't know, in a subject that is taught in postgraduate education all over the world. How could it have happened? But I still didn't want to take these results back to England, because in our schooling system, 30% is a fail. No matter how wonderful their achievement, but it was still a fail. How do I get them another 20 marks? I can't get a biotechnology teacher to go to Kuppam. What I found was a young girl in the neighborhood. She was 22 years old. She was an accountant with a local NGO. And she was a good friend of the children. So I asked this girl, "Can you teach them some more biotechnology?" And she said, "Absolutely not." She said, "I didn't have science in school. I don't understand what these kids are doing with that computer all day long. I can't help you." So I said, "No, you can. Use the method of the grandmother." So she said, "What's that?" So I said, "Stand behind the children. Whenever they do anything, say, 'Wow, fantastic.' How did you do that? Can you show me how you did that? Can you do some more?" Etc. She did that for 2 months. The results jumped to 50%, same as the score of a control school that I had in Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher. So when I saw that graph, I realized that there was another way. We have to figure out how to use that new way. Well, I came back to England, and what that headline says is that I was looking for grandmothers. So by that time, this film called Slumdog Millionaire had won all those Oscars in 2009. Somebody interviewed the author of the book, which became the film. And he said, you know, back in 1999, there was a man called Sugata Mitra, and because of his work, I got inspired to write this book. So the press landed up and said, what do you think of this? So I said, you know, I like the film, but millionaire was not what I wanted children to become. I would be happy if they would become slumdog professors. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The press started to call me the slumdog professor. So that's why that headline which says, Slumdog Professor searches for Northeast Nanas. So I put out a call in the newspaper saying that if you are a grandmother, meaning if you are a retired teacher, if you have broadband, a web camera, and if you can give me 1 hour of your time for free every week, then please write to me. So I got 200 in the first few weeks. I know more British grandmothers than anybody else. In the university, we gave it a name. We called it the Granny Cloud. The Granny Cloud sits up there on the internet. If there is a school in trouble anywhere in the world, we beam a Gran over Skype, and she appears on the school wall. So what does this all mean for schooling? I decided to bring the hole in the wall into the classroom. How do you do that? It's very simple. You allow access to the internet, but only in groups. And if you want, you can use the services of retired teachers over the internet. The BBC made a film about it which sort of explains this whole thing, and you'll be able to see it in action. So if you could click, please.
Val Almond and Debbie Mann are the vanguard of a revolutionary new approach to global education. Once a week they log onto their computers to talk to, read and play games with groups of children from remote parts of India.
Hello. My name is Debbie and I live in Loughborough, which is in the middle of England. Can you see this picture?
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah.
This cross-cultural education project is the brainchild of Professor Sugata Mitra, who, originally from India himself, took on a post at the University of Newcastle 4 years ago.
What's the problem at the heart of what you're trying to address?
You can have places where you can't build a school. Such places exist in the world. And even more commonly, you can have places where you have schools, but good teachers don't want to or cannot go. So what do you do about that then? Because there are children everywhere, and that's what I'm trying to address.
Let's talk about how this started.
Well, that was 12 years ago, and at that time I was working in Delhi and I was training people to learn how to program computers. And only the rich children got the opportunity to join these expensive training programs. The poor children did not. But there was nothing to prevent the poor children from having the abilities to be excellent programmers. So I thought to myself, what would happen if I put a computer
like an ATM in a wall in a slum.
What Sugata observed was that children would flock to these hole-in-the-wall computers and without any knowledge of IT and little or no English, teach themselves how to use them.
And when I asked them, they said, well, if you've given us a computer which works in English, then we have to teach ourselves English in order to use it, which sounds very simple, but that's what they were doing. The lesson from that first 5 years of experiments is that groups of children given access to a computer in an unsupervised environment will be capable of self-instructing them to use it.
Sugata then took his experiment a step further to see if he could deepen the children's learning experience.
I asked a friendly girl in the neighborhood who they sort of played with. I asked her to pretend or to use what I now describe as the method of the grandmother, which is that you stand behind the children and you admire them. Every time they do something, you say, well, I couldn't have done that. My God, when I was a kid, I would have never been able to find this. The children love that, obviously, and they want to show off to that figure. So when I came back to Britain, I started a recruitment drive, so to speak, for grandmothers who have broadband and who are willing to give me 1 hour of their time every week for free.
Excellent. Again.
What's their job? Their job is to provide that additional 20% boost to the children by admiring them.
Excellent. Give yourselves a clap.
That's what I'm trying to achieve in India using the British granny cloud, as it's called.
And there are now about 200 people from all over the UK in the granny cloud. You don't actually have to be a granny to take part, though.
Grizzly, fantastic. Well done.
Can you tell me what this is I am wearing and who would wear it? The Queen, absolutely.
Hello, I'm Tim.
How are you?
I'm all right. Have you heard of a footballer called Wayne Rooney?
Yes.
What sort of bear does Wayne Rooney look like?
Teddy bear.
A teddy bear.
So many children in the world don't have access to education because of the remote area they live in, they're poor, whatever. Can you see how the leaves have dropped from the trees? That's very near to where I live. But through technology, you can get through to the poorest of children.
And Sugata's new teaching methods have now also arrived on these shores. The lessons learned from his very first experiment in India with hole-in-the-wall computers are now being applied to schools in Gateshead.
Stephen? Bonjour. Bonjour, good.
So the process is that you take a group of children, you ask them to make groups of 4. Each group of 4 is allowed to use one computer with an internet connection. And then you trigger off the system with a question. That question is absolutely critical.
What I want you to find out for me today is, where does language come from? I don't know the answer.
Where are you going to start looking?
Scott, put it on tight. Some scientists say that language is the very thing that makes human. It says on here, where did you just where does language come from?
What website's this? Wiki Answers? Would it not be easier if the teacher just told you where language came from?
No, because then we wouldn't really be learning anything for ourselves. Like when you get a hard question and if like you find it out, it makes you feel much older.
Do you? That's what you feel about 9 and a half?
Yes. What does that mean?
And Scott... Whoa. I had my doubts about, is this really learning? It's efficient. The children enjoy it. The right answer always comes back. But is it really learning? That's a lot of stuff. I wouldn't have been able to get this much in such a short time. Really. So I waited for 2 or 3 months. I went back to the children. I asked them the same question, this time saying, you cannot discuss with anybody. You have to answer it yourself. And noticed very quickly that they were answering, that everybody was answering it correctly. And they were answering it with something akin to photographic recall. So I would tend to believe that what we are seeing here is deep learning happening through a mechanism which is very different from the existing model of how we educate.
Are you ready? Go on then, Jack.
Experts who study language know that there is no simple answer that explains what words came from.
Over here with our well-staffed schools, the internet allows teachers to experiment with different ways of learning, and it kind of depends on the attention span of the kids on any given day. But the truly exciting reach of technology lies in developing countries and the prospect of creating a legion of virtual teachers to send anywhere in the world.
So around this time, I started traveling a lot to explain to teachers what I had seen in these experiments. And teachers started to experiment themselves. And they would write back to me from everywhere in the world, really, describing how it was working in their environment. I've now lost track of how many people are using it, but as you see, it's an easy method, and you can adapt it to whatever it is that you're doing. The only real difficult part is for the teacher to step back and just watch. We are all trained not to do that, but you will have to, if you want to use this method, you'll have to be able to do that. So after all these years of experiments, I have to write this down, that what I have found is that groups of children can learn anything by themselves, provided they can read, search, and understand. So, if I had to put this whole method into one sentence, I would say that you treat learning like a self-organizing system. The way in which a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, no one actually does anything. But you just give a small input, which is the cocoon, and what comes out is totally beyond imagination. So you just need three things here in primary education. Reading comprehension, which is probably the single most important thing in the world today, is to be able to teach reading comprehension as early as possible. Information search and retrieval skills, which children already have. And finally, a way in which they can put all of this together into what to believe and what not to believe. We also have very interesting lessons from neuroscience in the recent years. I don't have the time to go deeper into it, except to say that there are basically 3 or 4 things that are very clearly evident today. First of all, removing the perception of threat improves a child's ability to reason. Whereas in our existing systems, we do just the opposite. We use the examination as a threat. And when you put the child under threat, his reasoning abilities are actually lowered. So it doesn't help, it hurts. You have to replace threat with pleasure, but not exhilaration, if you see what I mean. That you can be pleasantly happy, that's fine. Your brain works fine when you're pleasantly happy. But if you're, exhilarated, then it again stops working. So it's between two extremes. You have threat perception on one side, you have exhilaration on the other side. What you have to do with your students is to keep them somewhere in the middle. That's when the rational part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, works at its best. Nonsense excites children. And neurophysiology now has an answer to why it does that. A nonsense rhyme produces a lot of activity inside the front end of the brain. And finally, I have one finding which I really like, which is that we should not medicate for fictitious diseases. You know, a child is not paying attention, and instead of trying to find out why he is not paying attention, or what have we done, the parents and the school, to make him not pay attention, what we are doing is we are medicating them. It's ridiculous. So I'll leave you with a few questions. How do we examine a connected student? If a student brings the internet into the examination hall, how do you examine? What does qualification mean? Shall we redefine qualification in a world where you can pretend to be anything you want? What is curriculum? Who decides? Are there subjects which are becoming obsolete or have become obsolete, like arithmetic? What is the purpose of learning multiplication tables? It's from an age when clerks played the role of computers and therefore had to have arithmetic in their heads. That age is gone. Is the absence of a teacher a pedagogical tool? Well, in a certain age group, given the internet, I've found that it is. Will institutions dematerialize like the radiogram? What will they be replaced by? And what will we, the teachers, do in a world where maybe knowing itself will be obsolete? It's not an easy question, but we will find the answers, and teachers are a resilient lot. I believe that we will learn how to change. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bom, agora a gente vai ter um tempinho para refletir sobre tudo isso que a gente ouviu e viu hoje aqui, não é? Esse é o dever de casa após Conecta. Bom, mas primeiro a gente tem que reconhecer que é uma honra poder passar uma manhã de sexta-feira ouvindo o professor Sugata Mitra contar para a gente a sua experiência. A gente trouxe o professor especialmente para vocês. Então, professor, muito obrigada. Gente, vamos...